Ever get that feeling like you're missing something? Like there's a gap, a hole in the story. Imagine you're strolling through a grand palace, say the Doge's Palace in Venice. You're surrounded by all these portraits of powerful leaders, each one celebrating their achievements. But then you come across a blank space, a black void where a portrait should be.
Oh, that's gotta be eerie.
It's like stumbling upon a ghost, right? In this gallery of all these important figures. And that's what we're dealing with today. Marino Faliero, the Doge of Venice. The guy whose memory they tried to completely wipe out.
Yeah, Venice really went to extremes to condemn this guy, even after he was dead. It makes you wonder, what did he do that was so bad?
That's what we're going to unpack in this deep dive. Why did Venice go to such lengths? And what can it teach us about power, intrigue, and, well, I guess how history gets written?
You have to remember Venice, despite this image of La Serenissima, the most serene republic, it was always grappling with these internal tensions, the power struggles between the ruling elite, the commoners. It was a constant thing.
So not so serene after all, huh?
Not really, no. And one event that really cemented this divide was the Great Lockout of 1297.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So it wasn't just some political squabble, it completely reshaped how Venetian society worked. The nobility, they restructured the government to make sure their power stayed in the family, basically. Totally shut out the commoners from having any real influence.
Talk about stacking the deck.
Absolutely. And this is key for understanding Faliero later on. This great lockout, it planted the seeds of resentment, of rebellion, created this whole system that was ripe for someone like him to exploit.
So we've got this simmering tension. Enter Marino Faliero. Paint me a picture of this guy. What do we know about him?
Well, Faliero, he had a long career serving Venice, climbed the ranks, held important positions, proved himself time and time again. And then, get this, at 80 years old, he's elected Doge, the highest office in the land.
80. You'd think he'd be ready to just relax, enjoy the canals, not, start a revolution.
Well, maybe, but remember, even as Doge, he's still operating within a system that's designed to limit his power. Venice had all these checks and balances to make sure no one person got too powerful, even the Doge.
So, like, being handed the keys to a Ferrari, but it's got a speed limiter on it.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And to make things even more interesting, there's this whole story about his wife, Alvisa, who was much younger than him.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, some accounts claim she was having affairs with other nobles, and this is presented as, like, Faliero's motive for revenge, this personal humiliation that drove him to drastic measures.
Ah, the classic tale of the scorned husband. Pretty juicy stuff, even centuries later.
Oh, absolutely. It adds a lot of drama to the story. But we got to be careful here. This story, it probably came about much later, after Faliero's death, could be embellished, even totally made up to make his downfall even more dramatic.
So we should take it with a grain of salt then, this whole love triangle theory.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, we can't rule out that personal stuff played a role, but it's important to remember the bigger picture, right? The political climate, Faliero's frustrations with being boxed in. His motivations were probably a mix of personal and political.
A man caught between his ambitions and a system he can't stand. Yeah, that's a recipe for some serious conflict.
And that conflict is what boiled over into his audacious but ultimately doomed plot to take over Venice.
Okay, so let's get into that. What exactly was he planning? How did he think he could pull this off?
Well, Faliero's plan, it was surprisingly bold, almost like something out of a movie. He imagined recruiting this huge network of supporters, spreading this message of discontent, promising a new order where power would be redistributed.
So like a grassroots movement, but in reverse. He's at the top, trying to bring the whole thing crashing down.
Exactly. He was trying to build this, pyramid scheme of rebellion with himself at the very top. On a certain day, his supporters would rise up, target the nobility, and take over.
That is ambitious, to say the least. Sounds like he was going for a complete power grab. But you said it was doomed from the start. What went wrong?
Well, relying on so many people was a huge risk. The more people involved, the bigger the chance of leaks, betrayals.
Hard to keep a secret when everyone's in on it, especially when the stakes are so high.
Exactly. And it seems Faliero underestimated something else, too. How loyal the Venetian people were to the system, even with all the problems. There was this strong sense of tradition, a belief that the Republic, even if it wasn't perfect, provided stability.
So they weren't willing to risk it all for a revolution, even if they weren't happy with the way things were?
Not really. Change is scary, right? Even if it promises something better. And in this case, the risk of chaos, of violence, it probably outweighed any potential benefits they saw in Faliero's new order.
Sticking with the devil you know, even if you don't like him very much.
Something like that. And so, as we know, the coup failed spectacularly. It unraveled fast, leaving Faliero and his people completely exposed.
All right, so let's talk about that unraveling. How did it all fall apart? What brought it down?
It's kind of a classic story, really. You get these big conspiracies, so much secrecy, and they just crumble under their own weight. Informants, whispers in dark corners, people getting nervous, it all adds up.
Secrets are hard to keep, especially when the stakes are so high.
Yeah, and as the date for this coup approached, things started to unravel. Some of the guys involved, maybe they got scared, maybe they had second thoughts, but they started to back out.
Can't really blame them. Plotting to overthrow the government's gotta be pretty stressful.
For sure. And some of them, they even went so far as to warn the government, tip them off about what Faliero was planning.
Wow, so the system he was trying to bring down was saved by people from within his own ranks.
It's some serious irony.
Oh, yeah. And the Venetian authorities, they weren't messing around. The Council of Ten, they were the ones in charge of keeping the Republic safe. And they moved fast.
Wait, the Council of Ten? Wasn't that the same council Faliero himself had served on? That's right. He helped shape it, enforce its laws, and in the end, it was the Council of Ten that brought him down. Kind of poetic in a way.
It's like a Greek tragedy or something. So they arrest Faliero, this guy who had dedicated his life to Venice. What happens to him? What do they do with a traitor, especially one who was once their leader?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Venice didn't just want to punish him, they wanted to erase him, like he never existed. They gave him a quick trial, basically just a formality, and sentenced him to death.
No public spectacle, no chance for him to defend himself.
Nope. The execution was done in secret, inside the Doge's palace. They wanted it all to disappear, just like they wanted Faliero to disappear.
And this is where we get that blacked out portrait, right? The ultimate symbol of trying to wipe someone from history.
Exactly. It's called damnatio memoria, the condemnation of memory. It's an ancient Roman practice, a way to punish people even after they're gone by trying to erase them from history.
It's chilling when you think about it.
It is. They removed his name from records, blacked out his portrait, and they even had this yearly ceremony to remind everyone of his treason. Venice wanted to control the story, to make sure he was remembered as a traitor, or better yet, not remembered at all.
It's like trying to erase something by scribbling over it. You might cover it up, but the mark is still there. It was once something else.
That's a great way to put it. And that's what makes this whole story so fascinating. Trying to silence him only made him more intriguing. It's like this historical ghost story, This empty space where a powerful figure once stood makes you want to find out what really happened.
Definitely. And speaking of stories, there's one more piece to this puzzle. Lord Byron, the famous poet. What's his connection to all this?
Ah, Byron. He was captivated by Venice, spent years there, soaking it all in. And while he was exploring the Doge's palace, he came across Faliero's story. The blacked-out portrait, the whispers of this erased life. It really grabbed him.
I can picture him wandering those halls, getting inspired by the secrets hidden in those walls.
Oh, absolutely. He saw Faliero as a kindred spirit, a man who dared to challenge authority, even if it meant his downfall. Byron was a rebel himself, and he saw this amazing story just waiting to be told.
So Byron, being Byron, decided to give Faliero a voice again. He brought him back to life through his writing.
Exactly. In 1820, he wrote this play, Marino Faliero, Doge of Venice. He took some creative liberties, of course, but it got people talking about Faliero again centuries after Venice tried to erase him.
It's amazing, isn't it? The power of art to challenge official narratives, to give a voice to the silenced.
It really is, and it makes you think, right, who gets to tell history? Whose stories get heard and whose get buried? And what happens when those buried stories find a way to resurface?
Those are questions we're still grappling with today, for sure. Still trying to figure out how to deal with the messy parts of history, how to make sure everyone's voice is heard.
Yeah, Faliero's story is a reminder that history is never really settled. It's always changing, evolving, depending on who's telling it, who's interpreting it, and who's challenging the accepted versions.
Okay, so we've got this city on edge, a Doge who decides to rebel, a coup that falls apart, and this attempt to erase a man from history that backfires spectacularly. And then Lord Byron steps in and gives Faliero a voice again. What a story.
It is a great story, but I think the most fascinating part is this whole idea of damnatio memoria. It's creepy and intriguing at the same time, and it says a lot about how societies try to deal with people who challenge their power.
So let's dig into that a bit more, this idea of condemning memory. What can you tell us about where it came from and what it means for understanding Faliero's fate?
It really is unsettling trying to make it like someone never even existed. It's like something out of, I don't know, a dystopian novel or
It
something.
does feel very Orwellian, and it wasn't just a Venetian thing, right?
Right. Damnatio Memoria goes all the way back to ancient Rome. They used it on people considered enemies of the state. Big names, too, like Emperor Nero, the General Sejanus. Their names chiseled off monuments, statues toppled. It was like they were trying to completely wipe their memory clean.
So a very thorough character assassination, but on a historical scale.
Exactly. It went beyond just punishment. They wanted to control how people saw these figures, how history would remember them, or I guess forget them. The message was, this person was so bad, so dangerous, we're just going to pretend they never were.
But it doesn't really work, does it? Like we saw with Faliero. Trying to erase someone often just makes them more interesting.
You got it. It's like that saying, forbidden fruit is always the sweetest. The more you try to suppress something, the more people want to know about it. And that blacked out portrait, it just draws you in, because it's supposed to be unseen. It makes you want to see it even more.
It's like they accidentally created a historical mystery. We're left wondering, who was this guy really? Was he a power-hungry villain? A reformer who went too far? Or just a victim of circumstance?
And that's the thing about Faliero. He's this blank slate, a mystery we try to fill in ourselves. Venice wanted him gone, but they ended up making him a legend.
And then you have Byron's play, which, even though it took some liberties with the facts, brought Faliero back into the spotlight, which probably wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Yeah, Byron's play is important because it shows a different side to Faliero. Not just the traitor, but a real person, with his own reasons, his own desires.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Doge they tried to erase, I keep coming back to this question. What other stories are out there? Whose voices are still being silenced? And how can we be more aware of those missing pieces, those gaps in history?
That's what it's all about, isn't it? Questioning the official stories, looking for the untold ones, the ones that got pushed aside.
Because often, those forgotten stories, the ones whispered in the margins, those are the ones that tell us the most. Marino Faliero might have been condemned by the people in power, but his story reminds us, you can't really erase history. It sticks around, waiting to be rediscovered, reinterpreted, maybe even rewritten. And maybe someday, we'll find out what really drove the Doge who dared to challenge Venice. But until then, that blacked-out portrait, it's a powerful symbol, don't you think? It reminds us how complex history really is and how powerful the stories we don't hear can be.